Ahoy, and welcome in to another mind expanding episode of Not Allowed to Die, your podcast about mental health, where I, Dan Magler, social worker and life enthusiast, answer your questions about mental health. Alongside me, as always, is Mariska, the three-toothed Patterdale Terrier, and you might hear her doing a little paw maintenance in the background. It is warming up around the Chicago area, the snow is melting, and so she's enjoying her time outside. But we know if you care about Mariska's paw maintenance, the best way to help her out is to rate and review the podcast and to follow it because those 5-star reviews, they really help out Mariska's paws. Mariska also wanted to let you know a surprise announcement that we are starting to migrate, in addition to the podcast that you're listening to now, we're going to be starting to put the podcast interviews like the one we have today are going to go up on YouTube. So I'm not too familiar with YouTube, but I think now if you want to see Mariska, well, I don't have the camera on Mariska yet because I'm not that tech savvy, but if you want to see me while I'm talking to guests, you'll be able to do that on YouTube. As always, we create this podcast in part to bring attention to Pause for Patrick. I'm repping the swag today. So if you know a young person with an emotional health disability who could benefit from an emotional support animal, check out pauseforpatrick.org. Today, Mariska and I are incredibly excited to have our guest. Steve Wilson is originally from Delaware, Ohio, and he now resides in Scottsdale, Arizona, with his wife Lenny of 50 years. They've raised 3 daughters and have 2 granddaughters. Steve spent his career in the retail clothing business, while Lenny handled the books. He was originally diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 1978, but definitely had symptoms going back to the late 50s. For the last 7 years, he's been the facilitator for 2 mental health support groups in Phoenix, and is someone who writes about bipolar disorder as well. So, Steve, we are so excited to have you and to learn a little bit of someone who's been going through and dealing with this for quite some time. So, would you mind sharing a little bit with us about your journey?
Thanks, Dan. It's good to be here. My journey started when I was in 4th grade. I had a traumatic incident out of the blue. Before that, I'd been just a normal kid, having fun. I was a good student. Everything was great. And then, bam, the bottom dropped out. That was in 1958. And when I was in 4th grade, that's when the Depression really hit. Now, they didn't call it bipolar back then because they didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
So it was simply diagnosed as depression, and it was terrible. I didn't want to do anything. I thought I was worthless, couldn't sleep. I had a ton of friends, didn't want to do anything with them. My grades really fell, and that lasted for maybe a couple of months. And then I got out of that, and things went back to normal pretty much for the next couple years. I thought I was over it. And then in 7th grade, it all came crashing down again. That lasted through 8th grade. And then after that, for a few weeks, it was okay. And in 9th grade, it started over again and got really bad. I was able to hide everything from everybody. Nobody knew what I was going through. They had no clue. But I felt worthless. Back then, I didn't tell anybody what I was going through, so nobody had any idea. At night, when I was supposed to sleep, I would be wide awake, walking around the room or the house or whatever, just to try to get me to fall asleep. But that didn't usually happen until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. When I was after the 8th grade, I was scholastically number 8 out of 210 students. And in 9th grade, that all fell apart. and I couldn't study, I couldn't do anything. Um, I didn't get any therapeutic help all through high school and college, so I just tried to battle everything on my own, and in order to successfully pass high school, all I could do was cheat in every class because I couldn't do any schoolwork. It was just bad. And then it really got bad after, I graduated from college. So
But
that's
I mean,
pretty
I'm
much.
amazed. I mean, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm amazed that you were able to even keep going with carrying like for so many people, young people who have a trauma, they carry shame with them. And then I'm sure at that time, mental health was just considered a moral failing and a weakness. So I'm guessing that all of these feelings of being unable to do academic work, I'm guessing there wasn't a lot of support around you at that time saying, like, today we know more that kids who are struggling maybe dealing with mental health issues, but at the time, they didn't even have the term things like bipolar. So were you made to feel a lot of shame and stigma for the difficulties that you were facing as a child and a young person?
Well, I surely was, but the way I battled it in the high school days, uh, yes, there was a lot of shame that I went through, and I blame myself for it, even though I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Um, but I completely shut it down. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't think about it.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, my subconscious did. And that's couldn't stop any of the feelings that I had after that.
And how did that like play out in your relationships and like your relationships with your family and your relationships with friendships and your romantic relationships as a young person? Like, how did your bipolar impact those relationships? Or at that time, again, you didn't even know the term, but your mental health challenges.
Well, as far as friends, they were the best thing for me at the time because I was able to do sports. Uh, in 7th and 8th grade, we started partying and things went pretty well that way. And you also got to realize that bipolar isn't, wasn't, and isn't with me every day.
Mhm.
It kind of goes like a roller coaster ride. For a month or two, you'll feel terrible and be way down, and then it'll go away for a while. So you have a month or two where it's pretty good. So it isn't constant, at least that's the way it is for me and was for me. But as I do these groups, I find out it's pretty true with most of them.
And you have what we call bipolar 2, correct? Where you don't have full-blown periods of mania. So for some people who have, we divide bipolar now, and again, who knows? 10 years from now, we might have a new label and diagnosis. But right now, we say there's bipolar 1, which is people who at some points they get into full-blown mania, where their energy is so off the charts that they lose touch with reality. And then there's
Yes.
bipolar 2, which has periods of depression and periods of some high energy, but not to that degree. So if I remember correctly, you are dealing more with bipolar 2 diagnosis, correct?
Yes, I have never had a full-blown mania. I had what was known as hypomania, and to best describe it, uh, after a depression episode, when I really went low, 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 suicidal thoughts and everything else, uh, then that would go into a hypomania, which I guess I'd best describe it as feeling good, but not going over the top. Because in full mania, you can blow your whole life.
Hmm.
You can start buying cars, you can invest in the stock market, and you know nothing about it. You can ruin your relationship with your wife or your girlfriend. You can
Right.
do
A lot of
all
sexually
kinds of
impulsive
crazy
things.
stuff.
Yeah.
So I never had any of that, thank God. But the depression was the killer
Hmm.
for me. In I finally went to a psychiatrist in 1971, and he confirmed that it was depression,
Hmm.
and he put me on various medications, and none of them worked. I got worse day by day. Now that's 1971. In 1978, when I went in to see him, he says, I might have made a mistake. Maybe you're bipolar. He gave me lithium.
Hmm.
Overnight, I was quite a bit better. Now, not perfect and not even,
Hmm.
I'd say 50% better. But because he made a mistake, and maybe in 71, they didn't know much about bipolar. But anyway, because he finally diagnosed me correctly, I got my life back.
And that allowed you to have. Now, were you already dating your wife or things like that at that point, or were you together with her or not yet?
I got married in 1972. So she went through, she didn't even know what I was going through when we dated all through or in college. She had no idea. So those years up until 1978, I really got bad in 1970. And for the next 8 years, because of that misdiagnosis, uh, that's when she saw that I was pretty screwed up. But after 1978, I was never having suicidal thoughts anymore, and things went well. When I say well, it's relatively well because I was never back to my old self again for another 20 years.
And again, part of the big reason why I was so excited to have you on is because you have been dealing with this. There are so many young people that I deal with who just they've run out of hope. They feel like it's never going to get better. And here you are, having found a partner who could be with you through the ups and downs through 50 years. And not all, I mean, you outline in your books and your writing that it wasn't all perfect. It was up and down, but that you went through this at a time when our understanding of the medication, like we were over medicating people tremendously. We were giving the wrong medications for lots of things. And yet somehow you still managed to keep yourself going, to be gainfully employed, to keep these things there. And now to pass your wisdom on to the next generation of people going through things in a support group. So what are some misconceptions or some tips that when you're talking to people about bipolar that they seem to either misunderstand, like one of them being that it's there all the time, you already referred to. It's like most people with bipolar disorder or any disorder are normal most of the time. But anything that you find yourself sharing in your support groups or with people or just misconceptions?
Well, I guess there's quite a few. And one thing that really came to light, I've been doing my support group for 7 years now. And one thing I learned is that many of the people who go into depression, bipolar, hell, any of the mental illnesses were probably abused physically or sexually or mentally when they were young,
Hmm.
like I was.
Hmm.
And that's number one. Number two is even though you think you'll never get better, and at this time there is no cure for bipolar, but there is treatment. One of the things that is always troubles me is that a lot of people, not just young people in high school or junior high, but a lot of people 50, 60, I'm in my 70s, and uh, they don't stay with the treatment. They won't seek out a psychiatrist or a therapist. Those who do, many of them say, well, I'll try the medication, and they try it. If it doesn't work in the first week or two, they shut it down and try to beat it on their own. What they should be doing is going back to that psychiatrist as soon as they figure out it isn't going to work and tell the psychiatrist it isn't working. We got to try something else, because a lot of people just either don't take the medication or don't ask for something better. And so their life just goes on and pretty pretty far down for most of them.
Were there things yesterday I was talking to one of my alum, one of my students. She's finishing her master's degree in social work, but her brother has been her older brother has been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which in
Mhm.
some ways has some similarities to bipolar. And he is just laying in the house. He's a 25-year-old guy, won't get out of bed, won't leave the room. Parents don't know what to do. Are there any tips that worked, for you, or things that you share, like when a person is down in a depressed state? These are some things that can help that person to want to stick with the therapy, to want to engage with the medication. Any ideas or suggestions that you give to families, or anything that worked that your wife did that helped you to want to stick with it?
Well, I would say that I stayed in bed a lot when I was just out of college, but I didn't overdo it like a lot of people do, which means they get up in the morning, they have breakfast, and then they go back to bed and stay there till 2 in the afternoon. I have one lady in my group who says all she wants to do is sleep, so she does. Now, I don't know that that means that any of them have given up, but you got to understand it is a horrible way to live. And if you don't do the therapy, the drugs, support groups, you're not going to give yourself a chance to get out of this. And, and I would say, God, I don't know what the percentage of it is, but the percentage is high of people who don't follow the prescribed remedies. Now, you got to understand that we're talking about 10 to 12 million people in the US who have bipolar, and 60 some million, 70 million, whatever the actual number might be, who have mental illness in the US. It's about 20%.
Hmm.
So there's a whole hell of a lot of people suffering. And schizoaffective, bipolar, depression, mania. Uh, in many instances, the symptoms are similar. And that's one thing that's tough about the psychiatrist figuring out the medication and what your diagnosis is. But if the patients don't want to follow the rules, psychiatrist is hamstrung.
When it comes to groups, how did you first get involved with groups? And because I think I was listening to a podcast for suicide loss survivors, and they it was a bunch of mothers, and they were all talking about the power of how groups have helped them out with things. So how did you first come to did you participate as a group? Did someone bring you into a group first before you started running your own, or what was your journey with groups, and how has that looked for you?
Well, back when I was really bad, I never went to a group. I don't even know if there were any in the 70s.
Hmm.
Uh, but what I did when I began to beat bipolar, I started going to high school psychology classes and speaking about. I didn't do the same thing I did in my book, but I talked about mainly kids who um, were depressed and how they felt, because I would go to the meetings or to the classes and I'd give my talk, and then we'd ask kids to come up if they wanted to say anything.
Hmm.
Well, I had probably in the top 5% of this one school as a senior. She had everything. She had thousands of friends and A grades, and she came up and said, "I can't take the pressure. Everybody expects me to go to the finest schools, and they expect me to be the best, athlete." And she says, "I'm just crumbling under this stuff because I can't stand being told to be perfect." Another young lady came up and she said, "I have no friends. Nobody likes me. My parents don't like me. I wanna die." And so that's how I got started speaking, and then I had a girl who worked for me. She's about 16 years old. She was cute, funny, laughing all the time, and one Friday evening, she killed herself. I never would have guessed.
Hmm.
So that's how I got into this, and then we moved out here to, Arizona, and, I tried to line up with a couple, major groups such as, Not My Kid and a couple of things that we have exclusively out here, but they said I was too old. I
Hmm.
was trying to do, peer groups with high school students,
Okay.
junior students, and they said, "No, we won't take anybody over 35," which is kinda stupid, but that's their
Right.
rule. And so then one day was looking in a magazine, I saw, uh, a group that was looking for a facilitator. So I answered that, and they accepted me, and that's how it all started.
And what kinds of benefits do you see for the people who are participating in groups?
Well, the number one benefit is you'll find out very quickly that they're not alone, that there's a whole hell of a lot of people who are going through what they're going through. Not exactly the same way, but they're suffering just as much. And I think that's the biggest benefit they get out of it. Um, and some of them use it for their social activities.
Hmm.
We have quite a few who go to 4 and 5 support groups a week, every week,
Hmm.
and I would say that's what does the most for them, um, and several of those are the ones who won't do what's necessary to get better. So they
Right. So yeah, we'd like to assume that just because a person's doing group that they're going to maybe do all the other things, but again, we have to meet people where they are. And the nice thing about groups is that people can often they're free, like places like NAMI, which is National Association of Mental Illness. They might
Mhm.
tell you about support groups, and you get at group, you'll sometimes get feedback from other people who are really going through it, who will tell you, "Man, you say you want to get better, but you're not doing the things it takes." And getting that real feedback from people, sometimes it will jar them into action, and then other times it won't. And that's a hard thing to watch when you care about someone.
And it's the way it's always gonna be
Hmm.
because bipolar is so damning to your psyche that, you just a lot of people just kinda give up and get
Well, and bipolar is so much harder to treat than so many other disorders because the hypomania can be positive. It can feel good. And for you, with things like lithium or other medications, some people will describe taking the medications as causing them to feel flat or not really like themselves. Did you struggle with that in your journey on finding the right medication fit for you?
Yes. Um, and I still have that type of feeling. Um, since I was put on, I don't know, one of my medications, and it's been very good for me, but just to tell you what it feels like is if a friend of mine, say one of their kids dies for some reason, cancer or
Mhm.
something else like that, and I was really close to them. I don't cry. I don't get feeling anything, and that's because of the numbness that the medication can put me through. But on the other hand, all those medications, if you find the right cocktail, you're gonna have side effects,
Hmm.
and you've gotta make a choice. Do I continue with the medication and feel a whole hell of a lot better, or do I get off the medication because, say, one of them or 2 or 3 of them make me gain a lot of weight,
Hmm.
say 30, 40, 50 pounds, which is not unusual with some of these medications.
Hmm.
And that's the one that I find that most people can't stand putting on all that weight, so they'll change it. They'll skip the medication or whatever.
Yeah, and I totally, and I think we do need to, and I think the mental health profession needs to do a better job of acknowledging how important and impactful these side effects, or if it's, it's weight gain, it's sexual side effects, it's headaches for some people, and that I can understand why people want to go off of them, but often the cost is costing people relationships, costing the ability to function, costing these other things, and so it's really doing that calculus of, I might need this medication, and sometimes talking to your doctor and saying, can I use a lower dosage or whatnot so I don't have as much weight gain, or can we try something different that minimizes this, as opposed to just stopping. Would that be your advice?
You know, when I talk to people in my groups who are complaining about the side effects, um, I would say it's at least 50% of them will not follow the drugs that are prescribed or not go to therapy. So it's a big problem.
Hmm.
Um, there are drugs that can counter the drugs you're on from making you gain weight,
Hmm.
but I don't know how effective it is on the long term.
Hmm.
You said something a minute ago about not having many bipolar meds. Well, that's not true anymore.
And now there's a
What
lot.
is true is that not every one is going to work for everybody. So if you try one and it doesn't work, you can't give up. There's
Mhm.
several more and they're coming out all the time. And all you got to do is find one or two of them that work together and you'll get a lot better. Now, here's another thing.
Mhm.
50% of the people do not respond to drug therapy
Wow, that high.
that high. So they're forced to do everything else, not doing drugs. Uh, the therapy is very important. There's all kind of uh, I don't know what you'd call them, but they're you go into they'll have 10 or 12 people meet for 3 or 4 hours a day for say
Oh, like a
3 or 4
partial hospitalization program or an intensive outpatient program, like one of
intensive
those?
outpatient is one of them.
Mhm.
And that seems to help a lot of those people
Mhm.
who don't seem to be getting any help from the medication. There is now I never can think of the name of this, but it's magnetic. Do you know
Oh, yeah, transcranial magnetic
that's
stimulation, the TMS, yeah.
that's it. And it's just stimulates your brain somehow, or you get electrodes around you or
Mhm.
whatever they are. And some people get relief from that. Some people can get relief from ketamine.
Mhm.
Now, the first guy who ever told me about ketamine tried it. He spent $500 a session for many, many sessions, and he only got relief for maybe a day between each session.
Mm.
That was back probably in, see, I started my groups in 2015. That was about that time. Since then, I've heard of a lot of people getting help, but it's very expensive.
Well, and yeah, it's starting now. It is FDA approved, particularly for the nasal spray, and so there might be
Mhm.
areas for anybody listening to this. But I guess the main message that we're trying to say is, there's always new things coming out, kind of what Steve was
Right.
saying, and you have to keep working to if the things aren't working for you. And also what Steve said earlier about there's such a high rate of people who have multiple conditions going on at once and are trauma survivors. And in my experience, often for people who are the medication isn't working, sometimes it's because you have to dig in a little bit further on that trauma. And until you've healed from your trauma, the medication may not work. Steve, do you have any tips for family members of someone dealing with bipolar disorder? Of things that are, because they can, but for two of my older brothers both have sons with bipolar disorder, and it can get very discouraging and disheartening when you see, particularly when you see them not taking their medication, not doing the things that they need to do. So, any tips you have for family members of people with bipolar disorder?
I will tell you that I had no support when I needed it most. And I complain about it a lot, but I can understand why back then anyway, people didn't support me. And the reason is they had no idea what was going on. And they weren't supporting me. Uh, and I got very angry at that. And when I did go into the hospital, they only came to see me once and they wouldn't tell people what I was going through. And I still see that a lot in people today who get mentally impaired and their parents or their friends go, well, just take a walk or, go watch a movie. And none of that stuff helps.
No.
The only thing that parents and friends can do is support the person going through it, try to be an advocate for them, and don't bitch at them
Hmm.
and say, why are you doing this? The worst thing, and I remember hearing when I was going through it really badly was, we give you a good life here. I mean, my parents were well off. How can you act like this? And that just drove me down further into depression.
Right, and increase the shame because you were already not feeling good about what you were in. And there's this educator Ross Green who talks about nobody wants to be a failure, nobody wants to not do well at things, and if people aren't doing well, it's because there's something going wrong in their system. So
Right.
as family members and as friends and people who care about people with mental health disorders, we have to understand that if nobody wants to be struggling, and we just need to we can give encouragement, and we can say, hey, I'm not going to be able to be there for you if you're not going to get out of bed and do your treatment. But to be angry and belittling of people who are dealing with mental health disorders is very destructive.
Yes. And I hear that all the time in my groups that they lose friends because they're not acting like they used to. But nobody seems to go, is something wrong? Are you having really big problems? So, as I said, they just get worse and worse because of the negative attention they're getting.
If somebody wanted to, again, let's say they're living in Illinois, Colorado, wherever, and they wanted to find a support group for a mental health condition, where would you suggest them starting?
Well, there are support groups in every state, every large city. And if you have no idea where to look, NAMI is good. Uh, Mental Health America is good to find out. Uh, there are just a bunch of organizations. Depression, trying to think what this one is. Depression and Bipolar Alliance. There's a lot of them. If you go online and just put in, where can I get information on how I feel? I think I have depression. I think I'm bipolar or whatever.
Hmm.
And they'll come up. And then I even think some of them break it down by state.
Hmm.
As far as my group goes, I can handle about 15, 16 people in a 2-hour session. That gives each person a turn to chance.
Hmm.
So you're gonna have to understand that people can't all the time get into a group because it's impossible to help more people than that in a 2-hour session. So if you can't get in the first one, you try to find something else. Some of these groups, you have to pay to get in.
Hmm.
My groups are free. I, uh, I'm in Phoenix. I have a group member from Tucson who calls in all the time. So, somebody from Minnesota wanted to call my group, um, they could get in the group
Okay.
if I'm not
Full.
completely jammed up.
Well, where can people go to learn more about you and about your books, your story, just your kind of inspirational life that you've gone through? Where should people go if they want to find out more about you?
The book I just wrote is called Teetering on a Tightrope: My Bipolar Journey. And when I went to write it, I wanted to make it different. There's a ton of bipolar books out there, ton of depression books out there, and there's a lot of really good ones. But I wanted to make mine different by chronologically starting at age 8, running through my life. So that's the best way to find out because everything is there.
Hmm.
Um,
And where can they find that? Is that on Amazon or where do you?
Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
Okay.
It's $14.95, so it isn't going to break the bank, and it's 120 pages long. I don't try to make you read a 500-page book. It's simple. It reads very well. Um, Several people have told me they've read it in 2 to 3 hours, and
Okay.
several people have said they read it straight through one sitting. So that's the best way to learn what I've been through.
Okay. Well, I appreciate so much you coming on and sharing and being this person who is an inspiration for everyone that is out there who's listening. Who, if you are thinking that your struggles and you're feeling alone, Steve went through it and he can do it. And if he can and give back and to share his story, that can be you as well. And I think for me, one of the most healing things from my own pain is being to be able to give back to others and to be able to share, some of the experiences that I've been through in group forums or in doing this podcast and whatnot. So I really appreciate that. Well, Steve, any last words of, advice, suggestions, or hope that you want to share out with my audience?
Yeah, it's simple. If you're suffering from bipolar disorder, don't give up. Uh, you can still have a good life. You can still have you have good relationships. You can have kids. You can do anything. I hate to use the word normal people because I don't think there are any normal people because
No.
everybody's going through their own stuff. And one of the worst things I hear all the time is, boy, look at that guy. He's got everything.
Hmm.
Why am I the way I am? But you don't have a clue what this guy might be suffering from. So the best thing is just to plow ahead and enjoy the good times and try to limit the bad times.
Well, and I think that hits, the message I always give to everyone is, and what I'll say to, and to all of you is do the best you can with what you've got and do whatever it takes to get you through this world. And remember, you are just not allowed to die.
Good way to put it.